a spring in your step. There is a twinkle in your eye.
I can throw a rhyme down for you real quick. Yes, they call me Thrill. They say that I'm the man. You disagree, how could you? Let me make you understand.
Should we bring her on the show? Can anybody find me? And there she is.
Fresh as some bread, pulled right from the oven. When you feel rejected, you get some my loving.
Take on me.
She looks wonderful. Mom looks amazing.
Somebody too. Okay, Mom, bugger off now. I've got to show it to you.
Like that?
Joseph Jaffe, ladies and gentlemen.
You just made the new intro of the show. How do you automate intimacy? How do you scale humanity? I've used that phrase several times when helping brands come to grips with a changing world, and in particular answering the question, how do we become more social? My acronym was an ironic one, as I used a word that brands love so much, but with a very different twist: reach, responsive, empathetic, accessible, connected, and human. My guest tonight is a walking social brand, Fanzo. Brian's question for us all is a bit of a mashup of the two ideas, scaling and intimacy. So how do you do it when scale itself is the main ingredient in the built-to-suck lethal cocktail? How do you do it when at scale cracks become chasms? And that's a quote from previous guest on the show, Chris Fuller. I'm reminded of the quote from my former boss. It's the small things that are the cheapest things that are the most valuable things. Things like remembering your customer's name. Things like remembering their birthdays, anniversaries, or milestones with the brand. Things like responding to each and every one of their tweets. Things like thanking them for their loyalty. Things like giving them a personal call or texting them if they're late on a payment to ask if they're okay and if there's anything you can do for them. Things like smiling. Some of these items are dirt cheap and some are not. Some require humans being human and some do not. Some use basic technology to make things really, really easy to cheat at the game of faking authenticity. Okay, that was a bit snarky, but the sentiment is genuine. Under promise and over deliver, always, every single time. But wait, Joseph, we can't do this for every single customer all the time. We don't have enough staff. That would require investing in more people, said the brand that purchased a Super Bowl commercial with gratuitous celebrity endorsers, over-the-top production values, and overpriced prima donna producers. Yes, you can. Especially at a time when so many people are out of jobs and desperate for connection themselves. Yes, you can. Your employees and customers' collective bar is so low that you can only surprise and delight them by exceeding their expectations. So double down on intimacy and scale it up. Scale it up. Well, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a soliloquy with a bit of a backing track. But now you're surely going to enjoy Mr. Brian Fanzo. And, Brian, I'm just thinking I don't have music for you. I could get some music for you. Let's see what this one does. Yeah, that's a nice one. I'm going to use that one. Brian Fanzo inspires, motivates, and educates businesses on how to leverage emerging technologies and digital marketing to stand out from the noise and engage with customers of all ages. He has a diverse background working for the Department of Defense in cybersecurity and is currently the founder of iSocialFans, which has helped launch digital and influencer strategies with the world's most iconic brands. A proud pager-wearing millennial. I got to ask him about that. Is he still wearing one? And dad of 3 girls. He hosts 2 podcasts, has traveled to over 70 countries, and has spoken at many of the world's largest events. He is a die-hard Pittsburgh sports fan and a semi-professional poker player that isn't afraid to leverage his fast talking skills to read your body language and spot when you're bluffing. Let's welcome him onto the show, Mr. Brian Fanzo. Welcome, my brother.
Hello, hello. How are you, my friend? Love the opening monologue. That was great. So I excited to be here, and I did bring my pager, so we are good to go.
You still have a pager?
It's a prop, so it doesn't work anymore. But I wear it on stage every time on stage, and it's mostly the it's kind of me being cheeky on the fact that I was always told when I was introduced as a millennial, they're like, "Oh, you millennials were born on an iPhone." And I was like, well, actually, I had a pager in school, and I actually got suspended from school because I had a pager in high school. And at the time, they only thought kids with, were drug dealers had pagers. So I always say I'm a pager wearing millennial just to give context that those millennials like myself, I turned 40 this year. So I'm like right on that cusp. We weren't born with an iPhone in our hand, and we didn't have Facebook in college. So that's kind of my cheeky way of saying that. So yeah, I have a pager that I like to, kind of bring around with me.
Well, I just turned 50 and I don't know what I'm carrying around with me. I've got some of the, I guess, tchotchkes in the back. I've got an old Palm Pilot. By the way, cheers to you. I've got my wine. You've got your beer. I like late night streaming with a little bit of an adult beverage.
I completely agree. It's been a good day, but it's a long day. And so, and we're in East Coast here. So yeah, I'm excited to be a part of it, and beverage in hand.
So now I'm looking at some of the comments, and we've got this from a Brian Fanzo who said he's excited for this tonight. And apparently he's also excited on YouTube. But Brian Schulman is here.
All right. And he spells his name with an I, so I already like him.
Yo, Bree. And JS is here. I mean, JS was...
he brought the fire today in Clubhouse.
He was on fire. He brought the nerf to nerd. No, I brought the nerd to nerf. He was amazing. Wow. And Brian says, shout out to Pittsburgh in the house.
All right.
Look at the background. Do you like the background? That is just for you.
I do. I like that. You got the Pirate Stadium there. I appreciate that little PNC Park.
Little bit of a PNC Park. So if you've watched the show, and I know you have, you would know that this is the time where we embarrass you. And we come with like fun facts about Brian Fanzo that only Brian Fanzo knows. And now, well, actually, I pretty imagine everyone knows this about you because you are a little bit of an open book, right?
I am. I in many cases more transparent than most would realize.
How many people know about this one?
Actually, that they might not know about. That is quality.
All right, so you beat out 93 other Christmas hires to work at UPS as a union driver for 11 months. So tell us about this one. Worked really nicely. I mean, the whole idea of the bad Photoshop is the key to it. I'm going to give away the secret to my success. The key to it is the ability to oversize the head. What happened to you, Fanzo? You got so excited.
My camera just took a... Hold on one second for me.
Oh, I like this. Hold on a second.
No, you want... So this is a sky view, but apparently my camera... Hold on one second.
It's even better. I like all the views.
Yeah, I like this, right? So you can see the studio from up above, but I use Ecamm Live to kind of allow me to switch between cameras, and for some reason it.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll.
We're back. We're good. Here, hold on.
Yeah.
Yep, we're back.
Ah, perfect.
All right, look at that, troubleshooting on the fly. So I love that. I love that bad Photoshop though. UPS. That was.
What do you mean? What do you mean bad Photoshop?
Oh yeah, I mean good Photoshop.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so tell us about that story.
Yeah, so I 2003 graduated college. And couldn't get a job in IT. I lived in Northern Virginia. I just got married. I actually worked at Dick's Sporting Goods as a bike tech, just trying to applying to some jobs. And UPS, they came out and they had 93 Christmas hires. And on day one, they said, well, we have 3 union jobs at the end to the 3 people that have the highest productivity for packages with no accidents. And I'm an extremely competitive person. I played hockey in college, so I was at probably the best shape of my life at the time. And little did I know, like, UPS was the most workout I've ever done in my entire life. Like, you want to talk about productivity and efficiency? Like, they knew how long every package was, to go from, pulling up to taking the key out of the ignition, getting it from the back, putting it on the shelf. And so I was competitive. And so I ended up I was ranked number 2 at the end of Christmas, and I was offered one of the union jobs. And I tell you what, I made really good money, worked my tail off, and the Christmas money was good, but I was making really good money for that job, and I worked it for about 11 months. At UPS, I wore the short brown shorts. I was in great shape. I would take on 12 hours worth of packages and get it done in 8 hours, and they would pay us time and a half for the extra time that we spent. So I was hustling using that, college lifestyle, and it was definitely, I'm very thankful for it. It was an experience I would have never imagined I would have had, but it was a great 11 months.
So one thing that I've learned from doing these little fun facts is you always learn something about the person, and you always see how that influenced or impacted them in their lives and in their career. So already I've picked up in what you said, there was this super efficiency, almost this science to clearly logistics, which you would imagine. Was there a similar kind of efficiency impact on you in terms of how you ended up living your life and professionally? And I know, for example, from your marathon room that we both participated in on the weekend, that you are being quite meticulous and efficient, even about Clubhouse, in terms of taking notes, in terms of keeping a spreadsheet. So can you trace that back to this UPS job?
So that's an interesting connection. I'm ADHD. So I was diagnosed ADHD at 31. So when I was working at UPS, I had no idea of that, underlying superpower or limitation. But I would say UPS taught me the value of data and how you could use this data to increase your output. And I've always, I could say, in college, as much as I was I was in computer science because I really wanted to be, my goal in life was to be a Sports Center anchor. That's what I really wanted to be. But no one really told me I had to be good at journalism, and there was a lot of writing, and I'm not a grammar person at all. And I quickly had to change my major from journalism to computer science. But I really I liked using computers, but I wasn't into database and programming. And so I think for me, now that you say that, the UPS job was the idea of connecting some of this data into the real life and figuring out, and I started to analyze the routes, and I was like, this, they would be like, Brian, that guy's route, he's been on there 9 years, and he has the most proficient route. And I was like, well, actually, if he was able to run these packages on this side, and I would start to use that. And so to your point, part of what I've learned with my ADHD is I have to do certain things that either allow me to increase my focus or allow me to keep my head clear so that I can stay as, operating as I can. And some of them are taking, a lot of notes, being very methodical and being very strategic. So yeah, there might be a connection there. I don't think anyone's ever made that connection, but it was without question the first time in my life that I realized that if I could be better at the data analytics, well, that's not true. I played college hockey, and I was not the most talented player on the team. I was actually the very first time that someone was awarded the captain on the third line. So I had third line talent, but I was looked at as a leader on the ice and off the ice. And part of it was because I knew that I could be in the right place at the right time. I couldn't outskate anybody. I couldn't outplay. I didn't have, the massive skill set, but I learned quickly I was a left wing hockey player. I went to Radford University, a small school, just south of Virginia Tech, 11 miles south of Virginia Tech out here in Virginia. And it was one of those times where I realized quickly that I didn't have to work harder. I could work smarter than everyone on the ice. And I can tell you at UPS, that's what I did as well. Is I leaned in and was like, oh, wait, I remember looking at this giant sheet, and everyone else was like, oh, I got to deliver the most amount of packages. And I was like, well, actually, it's a percentage of, if you take more packages, how efficient are you with the extra packages on your load? And so I didn't think of it now until you've said this. So great job on that. But I think I can connect those dots now that was probably the first time I put it into action, and I was rewarded for it. And as someone that struggled really hard through school, and I mean struggled through school, I tell this story a lot, but my sophomore year in high school, the guidance counselor was like, what do you want to do? This was at the end of the year. What do you want to do after high school? And I said, you know what? I want to go to college. And he kind of laughed. And I know counselors shouldn't laugh, but he was like, Fanzo, you have a 1.8 GPA. Like, what do you mean you want to go to college? And I remember being like, well, what do you like? I have perfect attendance. He's like, you're going to have to get better grades to go to school. And thankfully the school worked with me. The teachers, I actually got put into like, I got a D in 11th grade English, and I got put in the 12th grade AP English because the teacher was, and her name is Mrs. Peterson. We're Facebook friends. So shout out to Miss Peterson, but she realized that like I struggled reading and comprehension. And so she was like, actually AP will take advantage of the things that you do best. And so for me, struggling through high school, believing that like, because I didn't know I was ADHD at the time, believing that, oh, once I go to college, this will all click, right? Like it'll be like everyone else, that like, it'll come easy. And, you know, like I loved college. I just didn't like class, right? I was president of my fraternity. I was a captain on my ice hockey team, and I was hyper involved in school, but I struggled really hard through, school. And so the interesting thing was the last time I struggled in something I was doing was school. Everything I've done in my career, I've found a way to be successful in, and UPS was definitely the first, step in that direction.
And look, I mean, nothing more in terms of being in the right place at the right time. There are two great ones. Clearly, the great one, Wayne Gretzky, always skated to where the puck was going to be, and then the other great one, Fanzo, was always in the right place at the right time, and probably no more so than social audio, drop-in audio, Clubhouse, and no doubt we'll talk about that a lot. We're doing an after show in Clubhouse, but I love how you see that everything that happens to you in your life informs you, even whether it's consciously or subconsciously. And specifically when we talk about, the struggles, the adversity, the failures, the dead ends, every single thing, if we look at it that way and if we use that way, informs us and forms us. I shouldn't say not even informs, but forms us. So something else we learned about you is clearly, I mean, you're an extrovert and you're social, but you hate small talk. And I even saw I loved it, a little bit of impatience from you today. You were not, you were definitely selling Nerf as opposed to buying Nerf, this idea of them having a chief TikTok officer, but you do everything in your power to avoid talking to people on planes. And so we actually managed to get this little, we had to go into the archives though, Fanzo, because no one's
way
been
back
on
in
a
the day
plane.
when we did that traveling thing.
No one's wearing, and so like, I have to tell you, I hate talking to people on planes unless we're both drinking heavily. But I hate it. It's my time. It's my time to watch, Netflix and just do my own thing. And I just can't do it. So I'm with you on that one. Even what would happen if you and I were sitting next to each other?
Well, the funny thing about that, the weird thing, because I'm very extroverted, very outgoing, and like just life, but like I don't like forced conversation. Like if the conversation is going to start with how's the weather, or are you doing this for business or pleasure, I would rather put my head through the wall like that. Like and I've always been that way. And it's funny because people will, maybe someone will run into me on the airplane, or someone will learn what I do for a living. And I'm like, oh, I'm a podcaster. I do a lot of live streaming. I'm a futurist, and I'm a professional keynote speaker. And they're like, you didn't want to talk to me on the plane. And so if someone initiates conversation, I'll have the conversation, but I get on the plane with like giant headphones usually. And half the time they're not even on, but I put them on my head just so people don't start the awkward conversation. And that usually surprises people, because if anyone I talk a lot, I talk fast. I love talking. I love being, hanging out with friends and talking, but yeah, it's like going to my daughter's, like, a friend's birthday party. I have to go to next Saturday. And like all the dads are hanging out with a grill. Oh, it gives me like I can't stand a second of that. Like I just like walk over there. I'm like, please, can this end? And I don't know what that is, like that personality trait, but it's the only time where that part of me shows out. The rest of it is I don't shut up oftentimes. So it's that's definitely it surprised most people, no doubt.
Yeah, but now everyone's going to be coming up to you and asking for your autograph. You're like, oh my God, Fanzo, just hold on. Let me just superimpose a pink magenta background, and I'm just embarrassing you a little bit. But look who's here. Roxy is here.
Hey.
I feel the same way about Roxy. I got to get Roxy on the show too, as well. In fact, I think we're just going to rename the show Clubhouse TV. It's going to be called Clubhouse TV. Why not? Why not
So
take an audio first?
my interview with
experience?
Roxy goes live tomorrow on my podcast. So I interviewed Roxy on my podcast a couple of weeks back. So I'm excited to share that with the world tomorrow. So it's amazing how the world's come together.
I know. All right. Well, we got one. This actually wasn't in your fun facts, but it was in your bio, and it just absolutely fascinated me. Which is this one worked out well too. So you were a semi-professional poker player. Now, I mean, it's a bucket list item for me. If I ever get the good old fashioned FU money, I'm going to enter the World Series of Poker. You know, the main event.
Yep.
I'm going to put my $10,000 down, and I tell you what intrigued me about this was because I know you. I'm getting to know you, you know, and every time I get to know you a little bit better, I like you even more, genuinely. We enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
But now what I'm interested in is here is this extroverted social guy, which works well at the table, fast talking, kind of verbal diarrhea, which works well at the table if it's part of your, you know, if it's part of the play. But there's something about bluffing and cues and non-verbal cues. And I'm just curious, in this audio first environment and world we're living in, how do you spot people that are bluffing? How do you spot the non-verbal cues now in this new interesting, you know, audio only environment?
So I love where you went with that, because so when the poker explosion was happening, I kind of leaned in, but I actually got sponsored. I was actually sponsored on the Full Tilt Poker side. I actually wrote for a couple of magazines, but I was sponsored as the millennial poker player that sucked at online poker. So I was great in person, but the online space, and I give a lot of credit. The U.S. government, when I worked for them, in order to speak at the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, you had to go to this training, and part of the training was you had to pass the certification. And when I passed it, they were like, you're not supposed to talk with your hands. You're not supposed to talk fast. And of course I was doing all of those. But I was lucky. When I passed it, they asked like kind of what are the things that I wanted to be a part of. And one of them is I signed up for Joe Navarro's boot camp, which he's a retired FBI agent. And I did 4 days of his boot camp studying nonverbal cues. And it became like, I could spend 18 hours at a poker table. It's the most zen that I feel in my life. And I love it. And so, you know, virtual and like podcasting, you know, for those that, you know, I've done well over like 500 podcast interviews. Every one of them have been on live video because I struggle talking into like the empty room, right? Like that, like empty nonverbal cue. And so social audio, like this great Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces, and soon to be like LinkedIn, whatever they're going to call it, LinkedIn Lounge or something. For me,
Lounge.
There was an interesting element where I quickly realized that I needed to adapt my environment to be my best self. And so when I'm on Clubhouse, I'm on my feet the entire time. Like I do not, every single time I unmute, I am on my feet. I'm walking or I'm standing up, because I think it's me kind of counterbalancing the fact that I don't have those nonverbal cues. Because I will tell you, I get away with a lot on stage as a speaker because I can read the audience. Like I will say, like every story I tell on stage, I have two versions, a 5-minute version and a 2-minute version. And I have no idea which one I'm going to do until I'm reading that audience. And if all of a sudden I see that they're nodding their heads and leaning in, they want more, okay, now I can change it up. Or they're like, you know, they're kind of nodding their heads, but they're leaning back in their chair, their feet are up. Okay, they're kind of agreeing with me, but they're not sure what I'm saying. I need to lean into that story. So I've always it's been my superpower. Like I was sponsored to play poker, and they would fly me, and I would have the patch on my shirt for like online poker sponsorship, but I played in person. And it's, you know, for me, that is definitely something with, you know, virtual speaking. You know, I did 74 speaking gigs last year virtually. And then with this social audio, I really had to use everything else because I wasn't getting that verbal, nonverbal cues. But, you know, like, I mean, we've done so many hours together. You know, one of the things that's nice is having like a back channel or a text and be like, oh, that was a great comment, or here's a link to what I shared, because you almost create your own little feedback circle. But it's definitely interesting. Social audio definitely is pushing the envelope on how we can deliver our message without any cues in a way.
And I think just like poker, right, there are tells.
Yep.
And some of them are obvious, like dear me, right? There are certain ones in Clubhouse that are obvious tells, and then there are probably ones that are a little bit more subtle. But if I was to ask you, do you think based on first impressions, do you think that you've been able to read people even in this audio first environment? And my follow-up question to that is, how often from those first impressions were you in fact right about those initial gut reactions?
So I would say yes, I do a pretty good job on that. I think a lot of it comes down to the cadence, right? The cadence and tone, being very sensitive. I am, being ADHD and I'm medicated. One of the things that I'm very blessed with is that when I am focusing on something, I become hyper aware of my surrounding. Like poker table is amazing because people always ask, like, what's the tell, Brian, that we all have to watch out for? And I was like, I just watch your feet. And they're like, did you just say watch my feet? We're at a poker table. And like your feet are the number one thing that you give away no matter what. It's the furthest from your brain and your heart, right? So, but it's also the thing, like you can just watch someone's shoulders and how they kind of, if they're tapping their feet or where they tuck their feet. And so for me, being that hyper aware, like I'm even, for me, I try to even, what is the first word someone says after I'm done talking, right? Like, because you can judge a lot about what you just said based on what someone is replying with, so that next time, like, was it too long, was it too short? And I know I'm long-winded to begin with. I never shied away from that. My entry and on my profile, it says I talk fast and I tweet faster. So I always joke, like, if you listen to my podcast, don't listen to it at 1.5 speed. I sound like Mickey Mouse, like because I talk so fast. But that is something that I've been very blessed, that I feel like I can read the room, read the people. But I will say part of that I found interesting, and this is me getting vulnerable. I've had a couple sips of beer, but I've had, well over 20 people comment on Instagram to me and say, Brian, I've followed you for a long while. I've heard good things. But it wasn't until Clubhouse that I realized you weren't full of crap. And that was, to me a little bit, at first it was like, well, first of all, I like the feedback because, but for them, there was a lot of like, Brian, hey, you got a lot of content, you're doing a lot of things, you got a lot of things going on, but they kind of looped me in on like that marketing bubble of a lot of people that are, kind of throwing a lot of things out there. And one of the things I noticed on that was people were like, once I could hear your passion and your, caring in your voice, all of a sudden I realized all these years I was following you on Instagram, I was judging you incorrectly. So for me, I wouldn't say that I'm pretty good at getting that first impression and reading people correctly. But I will say, thankfully, Clubhouse has helped maybe demystify some of the impression that others had of me, which is kind of, it's good feedback to know, right? Because I think you don't know how people are accepting you until they're willing to give you that feedback. So it's been an interesting journey.
I love that. And that's actually the first thing you typically say after someone talks, which is you validate them. You affirm them and you validate them. And by the way, I was freaking out there. I was thinking, what the hell am I going to say after he's finished talking? I'm just going to keep quiet. Well, if you've watched the show, you know that there's always a quote. And this is the quote that I found for you that actually talks a little bit to this idea of intimacy. And so this is the quote. And it's funny because this is a quote on intimacy, real intimacy. The deepest moments of intimacy occur when you're not talking. And that was Patricia Love. And I thought to myself, even though we're talking about most likely intimacy between two humans and in a romantic sense, we probably could learn a lot about this quote in reference to how we communicate professionally, how we communicate through social audio, but the power of silence, the power of pause, and the power of listening. And, for me, that's been one of the biggest areas of growth from a maturation and even just a communication standpoint over the last year in particular.
It's, I would say it's probably the thing I care about more than anything else is that, we talk a lot about everyone having a voice, right? I think 2020 taught us so many lessons in life on the importance of using our voice, right? I was someone that believed with my whole heart that I was a powerful ally, but I was not vocal in places that I know I should have been vocal now. And for me, that when we think about this idea that if we start giving everyone a voice, we also have to recognize that we have to at least let everyone know that they're heard. And we have a tendency, I mean, and we've all been there, right? Where we're waiting, we're listening for that person to stop talking so that we can start talking. And that's, I do a lot in the ADHD rooms. I probably spend half of my time on Clubhouse in mental health space than I do in the other spaces. But one of the things that I know is a struggle for a lot of those with ADHD, and I'm blessed that wasn't one for me, was that I do a lot of sticky notes. I have like more sticky notes in my, I have sticky notes around my house that help me with things. But for ADHDers, the reason that we oftentimes cut someone off, or the times we like jump in, is not because we're rude, not because we're not listening, but because we're so afraid to forget what we have to say that we just want to jump in, right? Like we have like that impulse. And for me, one of the things that I've really taken ownership for myself is that I refuse to, no matter what someone's sharing or how they're sharing, not only edify them and validate what they share, but make sure that they feel like they were heard. And I think it's, to me, that's a very low bar. Like it should be the least that we're doing, but it does come to a point. Like I think it exposed a lot of things, and it's something that I'm growing on as well, right? I think not only listening so that we can actually reply, but oftentimes people will say, Brian, like, what if I don't have an answer to someone replying? And here's the thing that I think we get wrong is that people don't oftentimes need to know that you have the answer. They just need to know that you heard them. And we sometimes calculate the two together. I'm like, well, I didn't reply because I don't have the answer. But we just want to know, and for brands especially, like if I could, for a brand, like simply liking a tweet or a comment with a brand lets someone go from, oh, at least they heard me, versus, wait, they didn't hear me? Now I'm going to post on Twitter. Now I'm going to do a live video of it, right? Because we get this idea, well, no one's listening, no one's hearing. And for me, that's something that I've really worked hard to lean into. And, I've even made it a point now in stages where big stages on Clubhouse, especially if someone isn't validated and they're skipped over, I will jump in over another moderator, over a host to validate that person, because leaving someone in that state where we've all been there, right? We share, we're excited, we tell a story, and someone's like, thanks. Okay. And now we go over here. And like that feeling to me is crushing. And if I can do my own little part to help people not feel that when they take that urge to share, it's something that I will take on. And you do a great job in your rooms. You do not only a great job of making everybody feel like they're heard, but also making sure that you're directing kind of like the traffic, which, let's face it, some of our job is traffic cop on Clubhouse, but it is a work in progress. And I would say those of us that are spending time on there, without question, we have become better listeners more so than anything else.
The whole concept, I mean, it's funny when you think about moderation. And thank you for saying that. I found my authentic voice. I found my place. I'm able to inject a bit of humor, to be a little bit self-deprecating, and to find the balance between my room, my show, and the exact opposite of the extreme, which is not about me. And that includes in part making sure that all my moderators are okay, but also at the same time this idea of people come up onto stage, and at least, I mean, what you said was like a masterclass, honestly. This idea of, because there are two parts to that answer, right, Brian? One is the ability to say, I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm not gonna basically try and BS my way to some kind of like half-assed answer. I'm just gonna say I actually don't know. But you just took it to the next level, which is to say this idea of validating them and saying, "But I heard you." And of course, there's a third part to it, which is to say, "I'm going to find out the answer for you, and I'll get back to you." And that is in part vulnerability, but also in part it's empathy, which is to say, I'll give you the right answer, even if it takes me a bit longer.
I mean, I think so like so press the damn button, is like, for me, that's the keynote. That's kind of what my message always is. And I always say, like, the reason I said that is because I really do believe we have to put things out. We won't know what works until we try it. But I always have two rules with that press the damn button. And the first one is, perfection's a fairy tale. Like, I don't even like the quote that says perfection's the opposite of done, because then we still believe perfection is achievable. And to your point, like I would argue every live video, I mean, I've done a lot of live streaming, right? That's where I did a lot. I always said the most powerful thing you can say is I don't know, because it adds validity when you talk about the things that you do know. And when I remember when IBM did this big survey of those under the age of 30 about this idea of those that are portraying perfection, what their first impression was, almost, I mean, it was like 70% of people, their first impression of someone trying to portray perfection was, what else are they lying to me about? Right? Like, it was instant, right? And that to me, it was very profound. I don't think it's anything new, but, and then the second rule I've always had is that control is an illusion. We can only control ourselves. We can't control what people are saying, where our content goes, and who sees it. Like, we've all done that. We've all created a lot of viral videos that no one's watched, right? Like, this video is amazing, and then no one, like, it just didn't, no one consumed it. And I think when we think about that, by allowing ourselves to admit we don't know something, not only does it make us relatable and not like a Rachel Hollis relatable, which that's a whole nother piece of the puzzle, but relatable in the sense of, people want to know that you're willing to admit that you aren't perfect, because the people asking the question have kind of embraced that. And I think that also goes as far to, sometimes we're afraid to acknowledge or support someone because we're afraid to get exposed that we don't know something. And I would make the argument that getting exposed on what you don't know will help you come across so much more powerful on what you do know. And I say, I don't know a lot, even to questions that are asked on stage. I've had multiple event organizers come up to me and say, Brian, I want to hire you again, only because you're the first keynote speaker that's ever answered a question from the audience with, I don't know. And I was like,
I'll build on that a little bit, because I want to add another element, which is, this is on the subject of scaling intimacy. But clearly there's a massive word. We're talking about empathy. We're talking about humility. We're talking about, vulnerability. But the fourth piece of the puzzle is trust.
Yep.
And I think I always wondered when I came to the US, as a South African, why Americans were just so, like, the line was lying, right? So, think of even Clinton, right? Which is, but it came down to, but if he lied to me about this, what else is he lying to me about, or she, or whatever the case may be? And it just strikes me that that's the ingredient, which is, when you lie by being full of hot air, by, through hubris or bravado, or being able to kind of fake your way out of a situation, and that's why I was a little snarky even in the soliloquy, right? How do you, faking, or you can't fake authenticity. That's the whole point.
Right.
But it comes down to trust. And I think that's a beautiful way to put a bow on top. Hopefully brands were paying attention.
I hope so. And I think the thing with trust that's the hardest thing to wrap our head around, I believe, is, especially in this digital era, is this really hard to build trust. And it's so easy to lose it. Like, it's so, like, we've all seen it hundreds of times. And like, that risk is something that weighs on us, right? And I would argue, like, scaling trust, especially when it comes to intimacy as well, is something that is even more difficult. But I think it's impossible if you're not willing to be vulnerable, to admit what you don't know. And really, I think even give people access into who you are, right? Like, for me, like you mentioned before, there's not many things that people don't know about me. I've teared up when I've lost a contract, especially back on like Snapchat. I'm not afraid to admit that I'm an emotional guy. And part of that, I will say, it became like one of my greatest tools, was that when I put myself all out there, I don't give anyone any power to come back at me. Like, no one can really bully me online. No one can really come at me, because I've put everything out there, and it's like, hey, this is me. And I know I'm not perfect, and I'm okay to admit that. And I think for brands, I think for individuals, especially, we learned that in 2020, right? Like, everyone is human. Like, COVID did not pick or choose based on race or sexual orientation or where you're from. And I think we have to realize that we're much more alike than we are different, right? We can embrace that. But the things that make us different are what connect us, or what really make us like it's really how we all kind of find our tribe, find our people. And I think the more we can embrace it, the more we can put it out there. And it's why, ADHD is such a, prominent thing in my life. I talk about, being a proud girl dad, but I'm also not, I talk about co-parenting and going through my divorce. I talk a lot about, the failures. And for me, when you mentioned authenticity in the beginning, I loved it. When someone tells me, Brian, I'm afraid authenticity is becoming a buzzword, I fire back and say, we can't let it become a buzzword because I do believe that you can't fake authenticity, but you can assume authenticity or claim authenticity without actually being authentic. And I think that is like that sticky ground, but I would argue without question, in every business, every person is in the business of trust today. The question is, how are you delivering it?
Oh, you just said so many things there that I just, I was taking feverish notes because, first of all, I've been on this like mission lately where I just get so irritated when people say, don't mention the P word, pivot, right? Don't mention the D word, disruption. Don't mention the I word, innovation, because it's becoming like part of the bingo. And you just gave the best comeback as well, which is, but don't let it be. Bring it back, reclaim it, own it. It's too important to give up now because of what it represents. So I love that. And then the other thing that you said is, you said the things that make us different connect us. And it's a very, very subtle flip. I heard this actually on the show that, we always talk about differentiation, but that's not what attracts us to a brand. Because differentiation is the brand being different from another brand. What connects us to a brand is the sameness.
Yes.
Is the thing that we see of ourselves in the brand and of the brand in ourselves. And so I just love those 2 points. And Stephen Rubin said, for those who may not be fully awake, Brian Fanzo woke us up. And I think he's being a bit of a wordsmith as well. Michael Fox said, not all moderators are created equal. Thank you for being aware of the in-room dynamics. And Charles Coachman said, you both are amazing. I think he counted you twice. But I like to see people's expressions when I speak with them. So I just find Clubhouse difficult to deal with. But I think if you were listening to Brian like I was, you start to, and Fanzo, it is kind of like what happens when someone is, visually impaired or hearing impaired. And that's obviously the wrong word. I don't know what is the right word, challenged, or that, I don't think that's the right one either.
I'm not sure what the right one is.
I mean, my mom was born deaf, and I guess the term is hearing impaired. But what happens is the other senses are heightened.
Yep.
And in your case, I think it's more superpowered. I think maybe that's the right term. When you are audio superpowered, when you are visually superpowered. But in your case, you've become superpowered, not ADHD superpowered, but you've become superpowered in terms of perceptiveness, in terms of ability to connect with people, in terms of empathy. You are empathy superpowered. And I think, Charles, to your point, it's actually in this environment where all you have is the audio and these little weird visual cues, like a flashing microphone, that you actually learn how to read people even deeper.
You do. And I also would argue we set the tone that we want to receive, especially in an audio app, right? So like there are some rooms, especially the ADHD rooms, where the idea of tapping the microphone to clap is not common practice. They just, there's a lot of people that, because let's face it, it's an odd concept for anyone that doesn't know Clubhouse. Like they put a microphone icon there for us to go unmute and mute. And early on, people started using that to give like the clapping piece. And so what I find myself doing is that I know when I speak, I would like to hear that or see that from those that are around me. Therefore, I'm very aware when someone says something I relate to, I'm tapping that mic. And people will often say, Brian, well, in the rooms I'm in, people aren't tapping their mic. And I'll ask, well, when other people are talking, are you tapping your mic? And they're like, oh. And so it's hard, if we want to set that tone, right? It's the idea. We've all done it, right? Like in a movie theater, the first person that starts to laugh, all of a sudden, everyone's like, kind of like it starts that
Can
chuckle.
You see, right? I'm doing it now, by the way.
I do. I like that. I see that you're
I've
doing
just
a beautiful.
innovated in streaming video by tapping the banner. Tap it, 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 tap it. What happened there? Tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it. That was interesting.
Can
you hear that? I think I broke Club. Can you hear that? So I don't know if that was me or Fanzo. What did you guys hear? I actually broke my own show. So we'll wait for Fanzo to come back. Well, thank you, Bob. Bob, I don't know what happened there. Everything went crazy, and then Fanzo disappeared, and maybe he'll come back. But that was just weird. You see, that's what happened when you actually try and innovate and make it stop. Anne says, "Oh, yeah, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it." I know. Well, listen, here's the good news. The good news is that's going straight into the next intro for the show. But yeah, I mean, maybe that just shows that some things are just not meant to happen. So Fanzo, come back. I miss you. And Anne says, Phil, you should listen. He understands, hearing impaired. And so we'll wait for him to come back. Yeah, I know that was a weird loop, and I think it was I guess it was my fault, because I just started basically, should we try it again? I'll try it again. Tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it. I don't know what happened. So Fanzo, maybe it was something on Fanzo's side, but come back. Call him. Steven's loving him. Zach says, Joe, you should be a LinkedIn Live OVP product QA tester. I'm in. What is that? LinkedIn Live OVP product tester. I want to. Fanzo, what happened there? I can't hear you.
But that was on mute. Now can you hear me?
So I'm assuming I broke it. Should we blame me?
I have no idea. It was the weirdest, but I will say, once you dropped off video, I could still hear that sound. So I restarted my browser. But I also had to turn off my Roadcaster and turn it on too. That was you were tapping your mic in the video space, and all of a sudden, all hell broke loose.
You know what the moral of the story is: don't flash your microphone in streaming video,
no matter what time of the night it is.
I mean, the beauty of it is 9 o'clock, and if you guys are not drinking, then what the hell are you doing? All right, so we've got time for one more subject. We'll talk. We're going to do an after show in Clubhouse, but before we do that, I wanted to talk to you about. I think you know what topic this is. This is amazing, right? The rise of the multi-hyphenate. It's more than just being a generalist, right? It is. So just set this up, and because I just find it to be beyond fascinating. I know it's something that you care a lot about. I even found this one, Fanzo, and I don't know what you think about this. It talks about there's the specialist, right? Focus on only one thing. There's the generalist, which is do many things, but with high stakes in one. And then I guess this says the multitasker, which would you define that as the multi-hyphenate, do many things with the same stakes?
So this is, it's such an interest. This is definitely a passion of mine, and like something that, I've always heard about niching down and finding like your one thing that you could do. And I've tried it multiple times in my career, and it was the worst moments of my career. And, in many cases, for me, the idea of just doing one thing limited my creativity, limited how I kind of showed up. And I will say I have become a great multitasker, even those that believe multitasking is a myth, right? And there is an element where maybe I'm not doing everything to 100%, but I have figured out how to do a lot of things at 90%. And one of the things that I would say in that sense of when we think about multi-hyphenate is that, with the term of, multi-passionate, multi-hyphenate, what was the other? Multi-purpose. There's generous, a polymath. Like there's like this idea. And for me, one of the things I found is that for me to be at my best, I have to allow my freedom to explore many interests, right? I mean, even like people learning my background here, right? Like, I mean, poker is still something I care about. I do a lot in sports. I'm a proud dad. ADHD and mental health is where I spent a lot of my time recently. I love studying storytelling. I'm a big Jeep fan. And so for me, part of it was understanding how all of these things fit into allowing myself to be my best self. And I always caveat this by saying, I'm a big believer that if you have a niche or a niche, whichever you pronounce it, you should own it, double down, and make it your thing. I'm a big believer in it. But I believe there's also a subcategory of many of us that either we haven't found ours or we're still exploring, and maybe we don't fit into just one, right? And my club that I host on Clubhouse is called the Misfit Mafia. And it's a shout out to Steve Jobs. For those that are wondering what that stuffed animal is over my shoulder, that's a limited edition, only 100 ever made, Steve Jobs Throwboy. As a diehard, my brand is iSocial Fans. That's my company. And iPhone, iPad, iSocial Fans. That's where that name came from. And for me, part of like when I think about this, just the idea of being multi-hyphenate, multi-passionate, is that when I allow myself to explore, right, lots of things, it allows me to be that misfit, right? That person that's been told you were broken, you were different, you're the rebel, you're the round peg into the square hole. And once I realized, like, yeah, I am, and it's okay. And I will oftentimes now look at when someone tells me like 8 things they do before 6 a.m. to be a billionaire. My first comment is, well, I'm a night owl, not a morning person, so I guess I'm not going to be a billionaire. But my second comment is, how can I look at those 8 things and extract them to what works for me? And one of those things that I've realized is my ability to have multiple interests and multiple passions and multiple even passive income lanes allows me to show up as my whole self. And I think we all are realizing there are elements of our lives that we've, prior to 2020, I mean, how many executives do we not know if they were parents or kids? And I'll share this real quickly. It was like one of the days that shaped me on this journey was when I first shared that when we were pregnant with my first kid, and I shared it very openly. And unfortunately, we found out we had a miscarriage. But before I shared that we had a miscarriage, I had a boss come to me and give me advice. He did the shepherding over my shoulder and said, Brian, you might want to tone down your excitement for being a dad, because there's going to be people that are going to question your commitment to being an executive. And I fired back. I remember being like, at 14 years old, the thing I wanted to be when I grew up was a dad. And like my dad was, I very blessed that my dad was is to this day a very prominent role in my life and someone I looked up to, and I always wanted to be a dad. And when I heard that like feedback, I was like so ashamed. But I can tell you, I bit my tongue because at the time I didn't really know where I fit. I also was dealing with these other pieces. But the interesting thing about that as a story is that when I announced my second daughter, we were pregnant with my second daughter, I was actually in his office. He had moved on to a different company. I had got promoted 4 levels up. They had to rewrite the job description because you're supposed to have a master's degree. I did not have it. And I was in the office where I was told that I shouldn't be proud about being a dad. And we put banners on the windows and we're as pink and as loud as proud as you could be. And so for me, that's partially why I look at it as like, I'm going to show up as my entire perfectly imperfect self. And I'm not going to be apologize for who I am and kind of what I'm about.
What a beautiful, beautiful story. And it's why I'm wearing my magenta and my pink. It's why your mic wire is pink as well. Both of our backgrounds are pink or magenta. It's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing it. And I think also one of the beautiful parts of that story is the fact that this idea of when you allow yourself to be truly diverse, to have an expanded portfolio, you become richer for it. Not by being the best at one thing or any one thing, but being the best at having all those things,
right?
Being more rounded. And I mean, I've learned so much about you, even coming into this conversation. And I have to tell you that I really do, if it's possible in 1 hour, to be even more endeared towards someone. That has happened today. Jennifer Watson says, this is such an awesome conversation. Loving this. I'm glad you guys loved it. From the tap it. That, by the way, is just me. For those of you that want to continue this little intimate conversation, we are going into the Misfit Mafia Club. We're going to do a little bit of an after show. I'm not sure who the moderator is going to be, who the host is. It's going to be fun. If you want to get that link, you can actually get it off my link tree. And obviously, if you're a member of the Misfit Mafia Club, you can just come on in, come on down. For those of you that want to find out a little bit more about Brian Fanzo, guest number 230. And as I often say on the show, the best episode by far of them all until 231. I'm just being, no, but this really was a good one. You can follow Fanzo on the Twitter, the Insta, the Clubhouse at iSocialFans. Maybe in the after show, we'll find out why we're not following him as at Fanzo. I'm pretty sure even if you had to reboot and start from zero, you would. We'll leave that to the after show. You can connect with him on LinkedIn, Brian Fanzo, and you can support. You should support the ADHD coin, the ADHD community, the ADHD economy. What a great initiative this whole creator coin is. And remember, he has been to 70 countries. He gave 73 virtual keynotes last year, and he has a new keynote called Futurist Mindset. And you can find out more about that keynote at brianfanzo.com. Brian, this is definitely going to be the new tap it. I need a new sound. I'm going to get a sound effect for definitely for my roadcaster that just goes tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it, tap it. Charles says, I'm glad Scott McCain introduced me to you both. Tell Scott that I miss him. He should come back anytime. Michael was looking for the mic button to applaud, but no luck. Great conversation. Anne says she wished she could, but she doesn't use iPhone, but maybe her husband will. I think I've just got to do one more. She said, Raw, what a wonderful father. So I think we're good. Brian?
Yep. It's a lot of fun.
Last words are yours, my friend.
A lot of fun, my friend. It's been great. It's amazing when we can connect on social, right? I remember my dad always telling me, he's like, son, like my dad ran a very successful peanut brittle company. He always like, son, what you're doing online will never replace a handshake. And I remember my dad telling me that first time, and I agreed with him because I do believe the handshake can't be replaced. But I do believe if you connect online, you build relationships, you're true to your core, you can build new handshakes and turn some handshakes into hugs and selfies. And it's been truly a pleasure to, we've been connected on social through many circles for many years. But I would say in the last 3 months, we've spent, 50 hours together, and it's a beautiful thing. So thanks for having me, and cheers to everyone. Make it a great night. We'll see you over in Clubhouse.
And I will tell you two more things. One thing is when I do see you IRL, I will give you a big bear hug.
Big hugs and selfies. That I can promise that. I'll do the selfie, you do the hug, we'll be good.
And number two,
You are Chuck Norris approved.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.